It was the middle of a dry spring in Latchfield, Georgia. One of those towns so small the gas station was also the diner, the post office, and the local gossip hub. Frankie Lewis, a 62-year-old hobby gardener and lifelong resident, was out early that Thursday morning digging a spot for his new azaleas in the church's back lot. He'd done this every year for decades, planting a row of flowers right along the side of the old community clinic that had shut down in 2001. But this time his shovel struck something solid. It wasn't rock. It wasn't wood. He knelt and cleared away the dirt with gloved hands, expecting a brick or buried pipe. But what he found was a box, a metal filing box, rusted around the edges, with a faded label barely visible under decades of grime. Frankie pried it open carefully, and inside, were patient files, dozens of them, and one in particular was wrapped in plastic, preserved. The name on it stopped him cold. Evelyn Maynard, a woman no one in town had spoken of in years, because Evelyn was the nurse who vanished in 1996, and this garden was where she was last seen. Back in the 80s and early 90s, Evelyn Maynard was more than just a nurse in Latchfield. She was a lifeline, the kind of woman who never missed a shift, who stayed after hours to walk patients home, who brought soup to the sick even on her off days. She lived in a small yellow house behind the clinic with a garden so beautiful it became something of a local landmark. Roses, lavender, basil, tomatoes. She said her mother taught her that you could grow anything if you spoke kindly to it. She wore her nurse's pin-like armor, always had her hair in a low bun, and she was one of the only black women on staff at the time, a quiet revolution in a town that still hadn't reckoned with its own history. But not everyone appreciated Evelyn. Some said she was too proud, too private, asked too many questions, especially about how certain patients were being treated or not treated. Evelyn kept meticulous notes, always carried a red leather notebook, always kept copies of her patient reports, and she kept those reports locked up. People noticed. And then, one hot morning in July 1996, Evelyn disappeared. Her garden was the first clue. She was last seen watering her plants before dawn. A neighbor saw her humming to herself. By midday, the water was still running from the hose. By sunset, the door to her cottage was wide open. Nothing was stolen, nothing broken, no signs of a struggle. But Evelyn was gone. The garden wilted fast. So did the town's interest in her case. The local sheriff chalked it up to a woman who probably ran off. Rumors spread. Some said she was hiding from debt. Others claimed she'd been involved in something she shouldn't have. Her house was cleared. Her files were never found. Her disappearance was eventually filed as unresolved, and then forgotten. Until Frankie Lewis dug up that box. Within hours, the town council had cordoned off the area and called the police. And by that evening, an article popped up on the Latchfield Chronicle's website. Patient files discovered in church garden reopened 1996 disappearance case of nurse Evelyn Maynard. Most people scrolled past it, but one man stopped cold when he saw her name again. Miles away in Chicago, Jonas Pierce, now 37, sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold. He stared at the headline. He hadn't said Evelyn's name out loud in years. She'd been the first adult to truly listen to him. She treated him after a bicycle accident when he was 8. And more than that, she protected him. Because Jonas wasn't just another patient. He had seen something. Something strange. Something no one believed. On the day before Evelyn vanished, he'd snuck out of his house and gone to the garden. It was still early sun, barely up. And he saw a man standing there, white mid-50s, wearing a dark suit and a badge. He wasn't local. Jonas knew every cop in that town. And that man was holding something, papers, maybe photographs. He and Evelyn were arguing. He remembered the sound of her voice rising, then softening, then nothing. Evelyn never showed up to work again. Jonas told his mother. She told him to hush. Told him he was making things up. Told him that woman had a way of sticking her nose where it didn't belong. Now Jonas sat with the article glowing on his screen. The name Evelyn Maynard rising from the past like a whisper. He stood, grabbed his coat, booked a ticket to Georgia. And for the first time in over 2 decades, he whispered back, "I believe you now." When Jonas Pierce stepped off the bus in Latchfield, the air smelled the same, like pine needles and sun-scorched pavement. It had been 23 years since he last walked these roads, but nothing much had changed. The same gas station with the broken E in the sign, the same picket-fenced houses slumped from time, not neglect. And just like always, people still paused to look at a stranger too long. Except Jonas wasn't a stranger. He had just never been allowed to matter. He walked down Main Street, passing the shuttered drugstore, the old ice cream parlor, and finally the corner where Evelyn's cottage once stood. The garden was gone, replaced by cracked soil and scattered trash. He crouched and touched the ground, still warm, still whispering. He whispered back, "I came." His first stop was the Latchfield Community Library. It had survived budget cuts and flooding, thanks mostly to one woman, Miss Doreen, the librarian with owl glasses and an iron memory. She stared at Jonas when he introduced himself. Her brows lifted. Then she smiled. "You're little Jojo, aren't you? Evelyn's boy?" Jonas chuckled. "I guess I was." She pulled him into a hug. "I didn't know what happened to you after your mama moved away." "We left that same year," he said, "after Evelyn." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Miss Doreen's smile faded. That woman meant something. Not everyone saw it, but I did. She walked like she had fire in her spine. "I want to know what happened," Jonas said. "I need to know." Doreen nodded slowly. "Then you'll need these." She slid a dusty box across the table labeled Clinic Records, 1996. "I saved what I could before they closed the place. Sheriff didn't care. Town council didn't ask. But I kept the files." Jonas flipped through them, heart pounding, notes, staff reports, shift schedules. And then he found a complaint form, filed by Evelyn, dated June 28, 1996, 2 days before she vanished. Subject: concerns about patient neglect, falsified charts, and outside interference in treatment approvals. Recipient: Dr. Alan Brisby, clinic director. But the form had a note scrawled on the bottom in red ink. Addressed: no further action needed. Jonas read it twice, then a third time. Addressed by whom? And why did the concerns disappear, just like Evelyn? Jonas needed help, and he knew who else had kept quiet back then. He found Frankie Lewis out behind the church again, near the spot where he'd unearthed the patient file box. Frankie was leaning on his shovel like a cane, looking tired but curious. "You're Evelyn's little shadow," he said. Jonas nodded. "That's me." Frankie took a long drag from a thermos. "I wondered if you'd come back. You found something that belonged to her." Frankie nodded. "Didn't make sense. That box was buried deep, like someone didn't just want to forget her, they wanted to bury her story." "Did she ever talk to you about trouble at the clinic?" Frankie's lips tightened. "Only once. Said she was worried about how certain patients weren't getting their prescriptions filled. Said files were going missing, paperwork being changed. She asked if I'd seen any strangers around." "Did you?" Frankie hesitated. "Yeah, a man in a gray sedan. Came twice that month. Parked across the street and just sat there. Never got out. Never talked. Just watched her garden." Jonas felt a chill rise up his neck. "Did you get a license plate?" "No, but he had this emblem on the side of the car. State medical seal. Looked official." That matched Evelyn's fears exactly. An outsider. Someone with access. Someone who didn't want her to talk. Jonas walked to the clinic ruins just before sunset. The building had been gutted years ago. Ivy crept along the sides. Windows shattered. But the foundation still held. He stepped inside carefully. Dust, silence, and long-forgotten ghosts. In the main hallway, scorched tiles and peeling paint gave way to something strange. The faint smell of lavender. He followed it, heart pounding. It led to the nurse's office, the place Evelyn had spent her afternoons after seeing patients. The door creaked open, and there on the wall, beneath a torn poster of CPR instructions, a name carved into the drywall. Kirmarsyr Maynard. He touched it gently, breath shaking. She had marked herself here, like she knew even the walls might forget her one day. But not anymore. Not if Jonas could help it. That night, he checked into the only motel still open. Faded curtains, stained carpet, a flickering hallway light that gave him a headache. He pulled out a notepad and began scribbling everything he knew. Evelyn filed a formal complaint 2 days before vanishing. Files were edited, sealed, or disappeared. A man in a sedan with a state medical emblem showed up. Her patient files were buried under the garden. And someone wanted it all gone. He stared at the list. Then he wrote one more line. Who was Evelyn trying to protect? Because maybe this wasn't just about what she knew. Maybe it was about who she was trying to save. And maybe, just maybe, that person was still alive. The next morning, Jonas drove to the county medical records office in Darlington, 2 towns over. Latchfield never digitized anything. And if Evelyn's files were missing from the clinic, maybe, just maybe, something made it to the county vault. The receptionist, a tired woman with coffee breath and pink Crocs, didn't even look up when Jonas introduced himself. Medical file requests need clearance, she mumbled, or a lawyer. Jonas placed a printed copy of the Latchfield Chronicle article on the counter. Her eyes scanned the headline. Patient files discovered years after nurse's disappearance. Then she looked up. Room C, ask for Dennis. Dennis was a gray-haired archivist who looked like he'd spent 20 years losing fights with filing cabinets. But the moment Jonas mentioned Evelyn's name, the man's brow furrowed. Yeah, I remember her. She came here a few times, always polite, always had questions. What kind of questions? Jonas asked. Drug shipments, lab testing timelines, billing inconsistencies. She was trying to figure out why the clinic was overprescribing medication for certain patients and underreporting deaths. Jonas felt his stomach turn. Dennis wheeled a cart of records over and began digging. Most of her documentation's gone, purged back in 2003, but there's one thing they missed. He pulled out a faded manila folder and opened it gently. Inside was a photocopy of a letter written by Evelyn. It was addressed to State Board of Medical Oversight, Atlanta Division. Date, June 25, 1996. To whom it may concern, I am submitting evidence regarding questionable treatment practices occurring at Latchfield Community Clinic. I believe lives are being endangered for profit, particularly among uninsured or elderly Black patients. I fear retaliation. Please keep this confidential. Jonas felt his hands tremble. This wasn't just a nurse being cautious. This was a woman sounding the alarm. And days later, she vanished. Jonas took a copy of the letter and headed straight to a nursing home an hour away. One of the names in Evelyn's recovered file kept jumping out at him. Naomi Harper. She'd been 17 in 1996, one of Evelyn's youngest patients, diagnosed with lupus. The system had written her off. But Evelyn hadn't. And Jonas needed to know if Naomi remembered anything. He arrived just before lunch. Naomi was now 33, wheelchair-bound but alert. Her eyes lit up when Jonas said Evelyn's name. You knew her? She asked. I was just a kid. She treated me, protected me. I think she tried to protect you too. Naomi's gaze dropped. She did. She turned her wheelchair slowly toward the window. They said I was overreacting, that I was a difficult patient, but Evelyn said I was being overmedicated, said my symptoms didn't match my charts. She ordered extra blood work behind their backs. What did she find? Jonas asked. Naomi whispered that I wasn't the only one. There were others, teen girls, elderly men, all being given something that made them worse, something that made them compliant. Jonas froze. They were experimenting, he said. Naomi nodded. They called it early compliance testing. A drug trial without consent. Evelyn caught it, and she was going to report it. Jonas sat down, heart hammering. Do you know who was behind it? Naomi reached into a drawer beside her bed, pulled out an old cassette tape. I recorded one of our sessions, just in case. I never told anyone. But I think you're supposed to have it. Jonas took the tape with both hands. Naomi looked away. I still hear her sometimes, and she said, not her voice, just her strength. Like she's standing in the room when I can't breathe, telling me to keep going. Jonas nodded slowly. She hasn't stopped fighting. We're just picking up where she left off. That night in his motel room, Jonas borrowed an old cassette player from the front desk. The manager laughed and said, You're the first person to ask for this in 10 years.
He pressed play.
The tape crackled. Then Evelyn's voice came through steady, calm, focused. They're targeting vulnerable patients. I believe they're adjusting dosages based on insurance status, and they're hiding adverse reactions in coded reports. If something happens to me, Naomi Harper can confirm this. Tell her to stay brave. Jonas stopped the tape, closed his eyes. He had her voice now, her final words. A message meant to survive even when she didn't. And now it was his turn to speak. The next morning, Jonas returned to Miss Doreen at the library. She looked up as he entered, holding Evelyn's journal, Naomi's tape, and the county letter. Are you ready to help me blow this wide open? He asked. Doreen took a long breath, then stood. I'll call the Chronicle. Later that afternoon, the Latchfield Chronicle published an update. Serpipunem, former nurse accused clinic of human trials before disappearance. Evidence now emerges. People started asking questions. Local news stations called, then Atlanta outlets. And somewhere, in a dusty office with a locked filing cabinet and a very nervous man in a gray suit. Oh, dear, the walls finally began to crack. By the end of the week, Latchfield wasn't quiet anymore. News vans lined the road near the church garden where Evelyn's files were found. Locals peeked through curtains. Teenagers live-streamed from sidewalks, and old secrets that had slept for 16 years were waking up fast. Jonas watched it all from the front steps of the library. He wasn't famous. He didn't want to be. But his face was now tied to a name the town had buried. Evelyn Maynard. And she was no longer just a missing person. She was a whistleblower, a fighter, a victim, and maybe a martyr. That morning, an anonymous tip was sent to the Chronicle. A GPS location. Coordinates leading to an old utility shed behind the former clinic grounds. The same shed Evelyn had used to store gardening tools. Police cordoned off the area. Jonas arrived as they cracked the old padlock.
The door creaked open.
Inside, dusty shelves, rusted rakes, a cracked bag of soil, and beneath a tarp in the corner, something wrapped in canvas. Jonas felt sick. Detectives peeled back the layers. Inside was a locked steel briefcase, heavy, old. They pried it open. Inside, 2 sealed vials, a signed medical waiver with blank patient names, and a printed list titled Trial Group A, Phase 2 Compliance. Evelyn's name was scribbled in the margin. Next to it, terminated July 2, 1996. Jonas stepped back. The date of her disappearance. The documents were bagged as evidence, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just negligence. This was a cover-up, and Evelyn had gotten too close. Later that evening, Jonas met Naomi Harper again. She was sitting in the garden behind her care center, planting marigolds with her therapist. He knelt beside her. "We found proof," he said quietly. "They were running human trials through the clinic, probably tied to a pharmaceutical company." Evelyn tried to stop it. Naomi's eyes shimmered. "They used us," she said, "like lab rats. And no one cared because of who we were." Jonas nodded. "But they'll care now." Naomi turned to him. "What if they buried more than files? What if they buried her?" The words sat between them. Heavy, real. That night, Jonas returned to Evelyn's old garden plot behind her former home. It was fenced off, but he hopped it. Moonlight poured over the earth. He stood in the middle of the overgrown weeds, then closed his eyes. Where would she have gone if she knew she was in danger? And suddenly he remembered Frankie's words. She always talked to her plants, said you could grow anything if you were kind to it. Jonas got down on his knees and pressed his palm to the soil. He whispered, "What did you leave behind?" His fingers hit something soft. Fabric. He dug quickly, heart pounding. And there, buried shallowly, was a bundle wrapped in Evelyn's signature lavender cloth. He pulled it out gently. Inside was a final notebook, smaller than the one she used at work. This one wasn't for the clinic. It was for herself. The entries were short, panicked, handwriting slanted. "They warned me today. I saw the black sedan again. I told Naomi to keep the truth safe. They'll come for me. I can feel it. But they won't take my voice. I planted it." Jonas flipped to the last page. One sentence. "The garden grows truth. Keep watering it." The next morning, Jonas handed everything to a reporter from Atlanta Weekly. They promised full exposure. Names, dates, medical corruption, systemic abuse of black patients, the disappearance of a nurse who dared to speak. The article dropped 2 days later. Buried Truth, the Georgia nurse who tried to save her patients and paid the price. It blew up. National outlets picked it up. Whistleblower organizations offered support. Civil rights attorneys opened investigations. And one pharmaceutical executive resigned under medical ethics violations. The briefcase had traced back to them. Back in Latchfield, something strange began to happen. People returned to Evelyn's garden. Not just locals, survivors, former patients, strangers. They planted things, left candles, drew chalk hearts on the pavement. The town, once silent, now buzzed with her name. Children who never met her danced in the dirt. The garden grew again, and this time it wouldn't die. That night, Jonas stood at the edge of the garden. Frankie joined him. So did Miss Doreen. Naomi arrived too, brought in her wheelchair by her nurse. A circle formed. No one spoke at first. Then Naomi lifted a small bag of soil and poured it gently into the earth. "She saved me," she said, "and now we save her." Jonas added a single seed, a white lily, the symbol of rebirth. And under the stars, someone began humming. It was the same tune Evelyn used to sing while planting tomatoes. And just like that, she was there again. In the wind, in the soil, in the truth. Weeks later, the Latchfield town square looked like it hadn't in years. Clean, alive, loud with voices that had once been silent. A banner flapped in the wind outside the community center. Evelyn Maynard Memorial Garden, grand opening. What began as a scandal had become a reckoning. The mayor issued a formal apology to Evelyn's surviving family. The state medical board reopened over 40 patient cases connected to Latchfield Clinic between 1993 and 1996. The Georgia Attorney General launched an investigation into the unnamed pharmaceutical company named in the files. And Evelyn's name was no longer whispered. It was printed, sung, etched in stone. Jonas stood near the back, hands folded. He didn't want the spotlight. This wasn't about him. But when they called him forward to speak, the crowd grew still. He stepped up to the small wooden podium, glancing once at the sea of faces, old, young, white, black, survivors, students, teachers, nurses. His voice trembled at first. I was 8 years old when Evelyn treated me after a bike crash. I was scared. My knees were bleeding. My mom was yelling. A soft chuckle rolled through the crowd. But Evelyn, she just knelt down beside me and said, "You're going to be all right, baby, but don't forget the pain. Remember it, so you'll know what healing feels like."
He paused.
I never forgot that, and years later I realized she wasn't just healing patients. She was healing a town that didn't want to see its sickness. He pointed toward the garden. She knew the soil remembers, that the truth, if buried, still grows. And then he stepped back. Let the wind carry the rest. That evening, Jonas returned alone to the garden. It had transformed. Raised flower beds, fresh herbs, painted benches, a plaque with Evelyn's picture smiling, strong, wearing her nurse's pin over her heart. He sat beside it and whispered, "We did it." A breeze stirred the petals of a white lily.
He closed his eyes.
But this time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt full. A few days later, Frankie Lewis found something unexpected. He was pruning lavender when he noticed something sticking out from the soil near the east edge of the garden. A tin key. Attached to it, a note in faded handwriting. If someone's still listening, this was meant to be found. Beneath that spot, just inches down, he uncovered a small wooden box. Inside, a cassette, a faded photograph of Evelyn and a group of young patients, including Jonas, and a handwritten list of names. Naomi Harper, Curtis Wells, Lorraine Isaac. All marked, "Protect." The tape, when played, held Evelyn's voice again. "If you're hearing this, it means someone finally heard me. Thank you. Please tell them I never stopped fighting. Not for justice, not for glory, for the ones they thought no one would care about." Jonas received the box later that night, and something in him finally exhaled. Months passed. A journalist wrote a book about the case. Schools added Evelyn's story to local history curriculum. A National Nurses Association created an annual Evelyn Maynard Courage Award to honor whistleblowers in healthcare. And the patients she fought for? They found their voices too. Naomi Harper began giving speeches to nursing students. Curtis Wells, now in his 50s, started a local support group for experimental drug trial survivors. And Jonas? He didn't return to Chicago. He stayed. Bought Evelyn's old cottage, restored it, turned it into a healing space, a small nonprofit called The Garden Grows. Free therapy, free meals, free storytelling circles for kids with no one to talk to. Because Evelyn had done all that before, with nothing but a garden hose, a voice, and a spine made of steel. One crisp morning in the garden, Jonas sat with a group of young girls planting mint and basil. A curious 10-year-old named Layla tugged on his sleeve. "Mr. Jonas, why do we plant stuff here for someone who's not alive?" He smiled. "Because she still grows here." He placed a small plant in her hand. "She watered truth into the ground, and we keep it alive." Layla nodded, then whispered, "Was she scared?" Jonas looked toward the plaque, Evelyn's face gleaming in the sun. "Yeah," he said, "but she did it anyway." And that was the lesson. Not that she was fearless, but that she was brave. And that bravery blooms even decades later. Even in silence, even in soil,